Part 3. Let's hope this goes better than Part 2. Hey everybody, it's Chris from Family Geekery, and if you are joining me after watching Part 1 and Part 2 of this upgrade of this 2012 13-inch MacBook Pro, then welcome back. If you haven't watched Part 1 and Part 2 yet, please go ahead and check those out. I'll get them linked down below. So, after Part 2, what we did was, in Part 2, we tried to put a second SSD in this MacBook Pro, and we had macOS installed on the first SSD, and we were trying to install Windows on the second SSD, and we ran into several problems. After reading up some more, it seems like it's all going to come down to that bus speed, or that bus of that optical drive just not handling those new faster drives. So we got a couple options. I had some time to think about it, and some of the options would be to take like the old drive that was in here, put it into the optical drive, the data doubler adapter, and put Windows on that. I didn't like that idea just because I wasn't sure if the speed of this would be good for Windows, and so we got some other options. Let's talk about those. So my whole intent with this project was to get Windows and macOS running at the same time on this machine, and I didn't want to just put one hard drive in here and partition it in half and have macOS on one half and Windows on the other half, mostly because long ago I did that once, and if you can imagine long ago having one of these that was even smaller and slower and then partitioning that in half and having Windows on there, it wasn't a good experience because I wasn't sure what size to make the partitions. Is Windows going to need more space? Is Mac going to need more space? And it wasn't a good feel. But fast forward several years, and now we get faster hard drives, we get bigger hard drives. So the next option that I came up with is just get a bigger SSD, place that into the primary hard drive slot, and then partition it in half and hopefully have enough room in both sides. So that is exactly where we're at right now. I took the data doubler back out, I put the SuperDrive back in, and I took out the 500 gig SSD from the primary slot, and I put a 2 terabyte drive. So the drives are getting cheap enough now that a 2 terabyte drive wasn't very expensive. So if I partition that in half, that's assuming that this all works, and we'll find out if this all works. Partition that in half, then we'll have 1 terabyte on both sides. So that's more than what we had when we started with, having a 500 gig drive on both Windows and macOS. So we'll have 1 terabyte for each operating system, and hopefully that should be enough. So this is where we're at. We're starting back from scratch with a fresh install of macOS Catalina on a 2 terabyte drive. So the next step, we're actually just going to use BootCamp, and we're going to use the BootCamp Assistant to install the Windows on the partition. So it's going to partition the drive for us. It's going to install Windows. I went through the first 2 steps already because they take a long time. It's all just downloading. So I've created this disk. Hopefully it's going to work right. So the next step I'm going to do is open up the BootCamp Assistant, and we're going to finalize that last step of just installing Windows. So let's do this. So we're going to launch BootCamp Assistant. If you don't know where it's at, just go to the Spotlight search, start typing in BootCamp, and you'll find it right in there. So we're going to launch that, and it's going to need a USB drive. I've heard that USB 2 drives work better than USB 3 drives for installing Windows, so I'm starting with just a cheap, I think this is a 16 gig, it needs to be at least 16 gig drive, USB 2 drive, and it's going to give us 3 options here. So the 3 options is to create the Windows 10 install disk, and then download the Windows support software. That's basically the drivers for Windows for this particular machine, and then the third step is installing Windows 10. So like I said, I did the first 2 steps already. When you do this first step, it wants you to download a Windows ISO file from the Microsoft site, and it's easy to find. It actually gives you a link on how to find it. It asks you what version do you want, like Windows 10 Home, and then it asks you what language you want, and then it just downloads an ISO file. And it's pretty large, so it's going to take a little while to download, so that's why I did that already. And then it's going to download this Windows support software, and all this while you have this disk plugged in here, and it's going to go ahead and create an install disk for you. So that's what this should be. So I can unclick these two, and then I'm just going to be able to install the Windows 10. So let me plug in the drive here and we'll get started. So I just plugged in the USB drive, which if you did the first two steps already, it would have already been plugged in there. And here it is up here. Here's my BootCamp USB drive. So let's go ahead and hit continue. And it says, what size do you want your partitions to be? So it recognizes I've got 2000 gigabytes or 2 terabytes already set up. And by default, it looks like it's giving me 48 gigabytes for Windows. I don't like that. You can actually drag this, click it and drag it however you want. Or you can hit this button here for divide equally. And it looks like it's going to be just over a terabyte on each side. So let's go ahead and click that. And it says it's going to do a whole bunch of stuff. Your computer may not work the way it's supposed to. It's going to be unresponsive. It's going to go black. It's going to reboot. So we're going to let it do its thing, and I'll come back when it's all done. And yes, it's normal for it to come up and ask for your password several times. So I think it's going to do that a couple times. Just go ahead and do that. Alright, so as soon as I typed in my password, I think it was the third time, the screen went blank. It rebooted. It came up with a black screen. It flashed up Windows real quick, and then it flashed away. And then I had a blinking cursor right up here, just a black screen with a blinking cursor up here. And that stayed there for a while, and I'll be honest, it got me a little nervous because I saw that black screen with the blinky cursor several times in our failed attempts in video number 2. But after, I say, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, the Windows screen came up, and here we are sitting here to install Windows. So let's go ahead and step through this. So I'll go ahead and step through this with you. We're going to keep the install language and the time and currency format and the keyboard, everything to English and US. I'm going to click for right now. I do not have a product key because you can always add that later. So I always skip that first just to save some time, and then I install that later once we get Windows all up and working. And here's our selection. It gives us all these choices of different versions. I'm going to select Windows 10 Home. Got to read the terms and conditions and agree to those. And now I see my partitions here. So it looks like Drive 0 Partition 1 is just 200 megabytes. Drive 0 Partition 2 is 1 terabyte. And then Drive 0 Partition 3, which is labeled BootCamp, is 1 terabyte. So I'm going to go ahead and take a wild guess that BootCamp is the one that we want. So I'm going to click Next on that. And now this is just back to standard Windows installation. If you want a step-by-step guide on this, I've got other videos that show that. So I'm going to go ahead and let this do its thing, and I'll come back when Windows is installed. Alright, it copied some files, it rebooted a couple times, it flashed up a couple different screens, and here we are at the go ahead and set up Windows screen. So I'm going to step through these, and I'll meet you back in just a few. And just wanted to jump back in here real quick to remind you to not forget my trick of disconnecting your internet. I happen to have my Ethernet cable plugged in here. Disconnect that before it gets too far into the setup. Otherwise it's going to force you to use a Microsoft account. I like just setting up just a regular user account. So if you do have it disconnected, it'll come up with a little button down here when it asks you to hook up the internet, and you click on the I don't have internet, and you can skip past the Microsoft login. So I'm going to set up a user account and continue on. Alright, we finished up the last couple Windows setup screens, and it popped us right up into here. So we're running Windows now, and this came up automatically. It says welcome to BootCamp Installer. You will be guided through the steps necessary to install BootCamp. So let's get started. More terms and agreements to agree to. So I'm guessing this is going to take the drivers off of the disk that we created here and get them loaded up. Hopefully everything comes up. I know there's a problem sometimes with sound, and if we do end up having a problem with sound, then we'll figure out how to get past that. But let's go ahead and let this thing do its magic, and we'll be back in just a minute. Alright, it must have finished copying all of its files. I did hear it flash the screen a couple times, so I guess that was the video driver loading in there. And I heard it beep a couple times, so that must mean the sound driver's in there. So it wants me to go ahead and restart to finish. So let's do that. And I was actually curious to see if it was smart enough to know to boot right into Windows, and it looks like it was. I imagine once everything is set up, we're going to have to choose at boot up which operating system we want to install or boot into. But this time, I guess since it's still going through the BootCamp installer setup, it must have known to go ahead and boot up into Windows. And it looks like it's must be all done. So let's go ahead and open up Device Manager. And see if all the drivers were installed correctly. And I don't see any exclamation points, so it looks good. It did pick up the driver for the HD Graphics 4000 for this model. And I think we're good to go. The volume keys work. The brightness keys work. So we got Windows running. Let's see what it says for the drive size, just to make sure it's what we expect. So here's our C drive, BootCamp, and we can rename that whatever we want. And it says it's got 925 gigabytes free out of 953. So we got 1 terabyte running on there. I guess the next step is to go ahead and we'll eject this disk. We won't need that anymore. And I'm going to do a full shutdown and a reboot and see how our options are for the dual boot. Alright, before we reboot, I'm going to show you one more thing. I went to eject this disk here, this USB disk, and I tried right-clicking in the bottom right-hand corner. Nothing happened. I tried double tapping like you would on a Mac. Nothing happened. I tried like control click, option click, command click. Nothing happened. So I went to Google Land, and they brought me in the right direction. So if we look down here, we've got this showed hidden icons down in the taskbar, and this little gray diamond here is BootCamp settings. So we're going to open that up. It says BootCamp control panel, and here's where you can set everything up for all the hardware devices that are specific to a MacBook. So you've got the startup disk where you can change which system you want to use when you start your computer. Got the remote control if you want to use the remote control with the IR receiver. Some keyboard options. And then here we go. Here's the trackpad options. So the first thing I want to do is do that tap to click. I'm going to have the secondary click down here for the bottom right hand corner just in case someone wants to use the click. And then also the secondary tap of 2 fingers. So as I apply that now I should be able to tap to click, which works nice. And I should be able to either 2-finger tap to bring that up, or bottom right hand corner. There we go. Now we can eject. Alright, let me go ahead and shut this thing down and reboot it and see how it's working. Alright, so I shut it all the way down and let it completely power off, hit the power button, and it came right up in Windows. So I think we have a couple options of changing that, and one option we have is to go down here back where we found this BootCamp icon, and we can use this to restart in OS X or macOS as it is now. But I think also in this control panel we had an option of selecting the system you want, and it's only given us this BootCamp option. So let's go into see if we can go into the BootCamp settings in Mac and see if there's some different options there. So I'm going to restart the computer. Well, that's not good. Maybe that's why it said it couldn't find it. So let's go ahead and try starting this thing over again, and we're going to use the option control to see if our Mac partition is actually still there. Alright, we are powered completely down. Let's go ahead and hit this power button, hold down my option button, and cross our fingers that we actually still have a Mac partition on here, because if we don't, I honestly don't know what happened to it. And there we go. So here's our Mac SSD. Let's go ahead and click on there and make sure we can still load into macOS. And there we go, thank goodness. So let's see what if there's some options on the boot order that's built into macOS. Alright, so the first thing I want to check is what the BootCamp Assistant says now that we've installed it. So it automatically unchecked the create the disk and download the Windows support because it knows that we've already installed it. So it looks like our only option here is to remove Windows 10. So we won't need to use this assistant anymore. So let's go into the settings app here, and we do have a startup disk, and it looks like we can select which of the two partitions we want to start up with. So let's go ahead and put in my super secret password, which wasn't that. And now let's go ahead and select the Mac SSD. Hit restart and see if it comes up automatically now. And it looks like it's going to. So now we know both in Windows and in Mac where to set the startup disk, or we can always use the option button at boot up to easily select between the two. And I think we're rocking and rolling now. Alright, so I rebooted back into Windows one last time, and I'll tell you, it's a quick boot. It's nice and speedy with that SSD drive. So I just wanted to come back in here and explore our hardware one more time just to see that everything looks good. So it sees our i5 processor here. It sees all 16 gigs of RAM. And it sees that I've formatted it. Windows thinks that it's formatted 1 terabyte out of the 2 terabytes, which is actually correct for what Windows should see. So that's all good. So I would say that part 3 of this little journey through dual booting is going to end a lot nicer than part 2 did. So overall, I'm very happy with what has been set up on this. 1 terabyte for both Windows and for Mac should be plenty of room for all the programs I need to install on both sides, so I am very happy. So that's going to wrap up this video. I thank you so much for having the patience to make it all the way through this with me. Thank you for sticking around and watching all 3 videos, and thanks for watching just in general. If you've enjoyed watching me go through all 3 parts of this, go ahead and hit that like button on this video and the other 2 videos if you want. And go ahead and hit that subscribe video so you can watch more videos like this. We got some more projects coming up in the near future, so you don't want to miss those. And don't forget to check out the Family Geekery Podcast, new episodes every Tuesday, covering all kinds of geeky stuff. So thank you as always for watching. Until next time, peace out and geek out.